This is the Inside Data Center podcast. We talk to the people who power the data center sector to give you insider info on everything happening in DC today. Here's your host, Andy Davis.
Welcome to the Inside Data Center podcast. We are back with another episode of Data Center News and GPUs, joined by my usual guest or sidekick or co-host, whatever we want to call ourselves, Ben Baldieri. Good afternoon, Ben.
Good afternoon, Andy. It's been a minute. Our 1 month cadence has it's been a bit lackluster.
I know. I had to look earlier. It was April we released. So what are we? May, June, 3 months ago. But to be fair, we've been quite busy, and the industry's been pretty busy as well. So we've got plenty to talk about, and quite try and do it within a relatively short time period. So this is going to be a pretty manic few months. And we've been away. We've been traveling. We've had, some of us have had personal events and things. So it's been a pretty crazy period. But I thought we'd start last episode, April. You decided to ask each of us for our predictions, totally off the cuff. So I thought we'd better start there, really, to prove that maybe we do or we don't know what we're talking about.
Or we're lucky.
Yeah, exactly. Your prediction was more discussion around sovereign AI. So but this was I think we released it around April Fool's Day. So we're going back to the end of March, start of April for that prediction. So what's happened?
A lot. I think is probably the best way to discuss it. So there's three big things that have happened in the past couple of weeks in that regard. We're now seeing some clarity in regard to overall approaches to AI governance, overall strategy from a national standpoint. So last week, the Trump administration, the US, put out their AI action plan to much fanfare with the, who was it? I think it was the All In podcast. In the US, big event. And then this week, we've seen the UK's AI Security Institute team up with their Canadian counterparts, AWS, Anthropic, and then a couple of other parties as well. And then this is also at the same time that the Chinese government have come out with their vision for how the world of AI looks, with the proposed creation of an international AI governance organization, headquartered in Shanghai, naturally, which I assume would probably serve a similar kind of function to the International Atomic Energy Authority, in that it makes sure that everyone is on the straight and narrow, as it were, making sure that there's no bad actors operating outside of the rules. Obviously, there are three very different ideologies underpinning these things, which then also probably means that there's some different definitions of sovereignty as well. What does sovereignty mean in this instance? And I think Europe and the UK have got one very clear definition, which is that our data from our citizens stays in region and it doesn't leave. And in order to support those customers and to process that data, that capacity has to be built in country, with a view to then ultimately being able to build up a bit of domestic capacity as well. But then when you look at the UK and the EU, there's a bit of a bifurcation there in terms of how far sovereignty actually goes. So from a UK standpoint, it seems to be building up of domestic capacity in the same way, but ultimately that domestic capacity could still then be sold on to a US hyperscaler, which is it really sovereign capacity? I don't know. Maybe not. Depends on the definition that you're operating on. Europe is going one step further. I think it was the head of legal for Microsoft, I think, was asked under oath in some court case recently whether or not Microsoft could guarantee that European sovereign data would remain in country if the US government requested that data. And this particular individual said no, could not guarantee that. So is the UK sovereign in name only with the approach that they're taking? Potentially. I think this is where we're going to start to see where the differences really lie. And also, is the UK going to want to put the Cloud Act to the test in quite the same way that the French have, because I mean, naturally, it was the French who were going to ask that question, right? And fair play to them, because it's the question that needs asking. So yeah, I think it's interesting how all of these things seem to be moving, because I mean, just 3 short months ago, the need for sovereign capacity wasn't really clear in quite the same way. But I think a lot of places have now started to wake up to the fact that if this is going to become infrastructure, as in AI is going to become infrastructure in and of itself, that infrastructure's got to be domestic. Otherwise, you just end up renting from someone else, which is arguably what happened in cloud, right? Which has been great for the US, not necessarily quite so good for everyone else from an economic standpoint, from a tax standpoint. And I think that trend is only going to continue. And I think I'm going to say my prediction for what happens next. Now that we have clarity, now that we have 3 competing offers out in the market from a governance perspective, I think we'll start to see alignment with some countries with those differing ideologies. And I mean, that's going to have a massive impact on which markets do well and where. China's leading into the open source approach. It's kind of the infrastructure investment model, which has probably got some similarities with the Belt and Road Initiative, which is big investments in big infrastructure projects, and then everyone throws their arms up saying, oh, but it's basically debt trap diplomacy, and if someone defaults, then it ends up being that they take control of a port or something like that. But if you get into the nitty-gritty, the terms of these agreements aren't really that different from the IMF. It's just that we're not doing it, so we don't like it. Again, maybe I'm a little bit cynical there, but hey-ho. The US has obviously got the frontier models, although they're being challenged by the open source alternatives from China at the moment, from a benchmarking and from a capability standpoint. And then there's Europe, which is taking the regulatory first approach, which on the one hand may limit innovation, but on the other hand, there is the Brussels effect, whereby if Brussels does something and it works, then people do tend to get on sides, because as broken as Europe seems to be from a capital market standpoint at the moment, collectively, it is a massive, massive market with a huge amount of collective GDP. Problem is, at the moment, it's really fragmented. If there's ways to fix that fragmentation, then maybe things get that little bit more interesting. And I think over the course of the next few months, we'll start to see a bit of delineation between, right, who's aligning with what and why. And then that will dictate what happens after that.
And if you look at the development of the project, some of the projects that I wrote down before we started doing this podcast around what's been announced in the last few months, sovereignty is a big part of that, where the major developments are happening in regions where they're looking for that data. Basically, they want to hold the data. Yep. They want the development in country, and they're looking at that as a strategy now. And Stargate announced in Norway today, like as an example, and we'll go through some of that shortly. My prediction was the last time we recorded was hot off the Microsoft pause. Who remembers those crazy days of when Microsoft announced a pause? Exactly. When Microsoft announced a pause, and everyone messaged me saying, "Is it has the bubble burst?" The obsession with a bubble will always amuse me. And I said there'll be more announcements, more delays, more re-evaluations, I guess. And we did see that. I think I was reading earlier that Wells Fargo at the end of April, it was about the AWS reallocation or delays in leasing conversations. Microsoft was still in the announcement around slowing down. You were seeing all the big hyperscalers in the analyst notes pausing, ceasing. Stock dropped heavily around those periods as well, if people keep their eyes on the market. But then you fast forward to now, and yesterday I think it was Meta that have increased CapEx, Google have increased CapEx, Microsoft have increased CapEx, Oracle have increased CapEx. And I looked, the stat is hyperscalers expect to spend $345 billion on CapEx in 2025, which is 52% year-on-year growth. So when you have these periods where an analyst somewhere gets a rumor and decides to write a note and it impacts the whole market, I always say to people, have conversations, talk. You can find out what's really happening. And again, a lot of that reevaluation ties into your point around sovereignty is where's the right area or region or development to invest this capex. If we're going to invest 345 billion collectively, we want to get the right return on that. So where do we spend it? And I think that's become more of the conversation, whether that is it's still in the same region, but it's a different site, or whether it's we're going to invest that into an existing site, or whether it is actually that region doesn't make sense anymore, so we're going to reinvest it somewhere else.
Yep.
That happens all the time in this market. That's the way this industry moves. And because it's moving so quickly right now, that can cause, I'd say ripples, but it's probably more rather large waves across the industry, which gets people thinking. So a bit fascinating when I look back and thought that has all happened within the last 3 months. We've gone from everyone panicking, that was the uneducated panicking, I guess is a better way of putting it, to now people looking at it going, oh, CapEx is increasing again and again and again. And they've all said as well that CapEx will increase further in 2026. They're all saying that in their earnings reports. Things could change, obviously, but that's what they're all saying right now. So the bubble has not burst. Breaking news.
Definitely not. I think that you raised an interesting point there around like that money is ultimately going to look for a home whereby it comes back the quickest, right? And I think one of the other things that I've seen come up a fair few times over the course of the past few months is shifting market dominance, especially in Europe, right? So FLAP-D, historically, the dominant markets. Not necessarily the case anymore, given the trends. Why is that? Well, like the UK, for example, grid connections, the time that you have to wait to even get plugged into the grid before you can even start powering things up now is absolutely massive, right? And if you've got a big old pile of cash that you need to do something with, the longer you wait to not do something, one, the market's going to change in a way that you probably can't anticipate, and two, you can't have big piles of cash sat doing nothing for extended periods of time. So you're going to go wherever, one, power is cheapest, and two, you can get access to that power as quickly as possible, because that's going to reduce the amount of time it takes you to start seeing a return, right? And I think that the historical markets, the FLAP-D markets, they're incredibly built out at the moment, which means that you're looking around the edges for whatever little bits of power you can get here and there, versus Norway, for example. Again, starting Norway. Why? Well, there's 230 megawatts that they're starting with the option to potentially extend that up to 520. I think it was. Good luck finding 520 megawatts anywhere in the UK. I mean, even in aggregate, good luck finding that much power.
Yeah, I think the AI growth zones in the UK is interesting, isn't it? Because you had Manchester, I think, was one that was announced fairly recently.
Teesworks.
There's Teesside, there's Manchester.
Yeah,
there's Yorkshire. But the Manchester one is, I think, around 1.2 gig or something. Again, don't quote me, it's 1 point something. But yeah, you do think when. like yes, but when. And that is a challenge, I think. But what you've got, I had an interesting conversation with a CEO at a developer platform yesterday, and the way that customers are looking for different sites. So you've got multiple customers looking for different things. So you've got customers like OpenAI, Stargate looking for that in Norway. That's what their market is. But you've also got customers looking for the larger city-based facilities. Yep. You've got customers looking for new regions. You've got customers looking to develop in regions they're already in. So it's quite a dynamic market at the moment. So it's, I guess, having that portfolio, the ideal portfolio would be across multiple regions, multiple sites that can serve all the customers. That would be the ideal if you're an investor, to have all these different, portfolios of land that can say, OpenAI, I've got this one over here. Microsoft, I can do that for you here. But obviously that's not realistic. But I think you've got so many customers now looking for different things, which has caused quite a lot of dynamics in the market. See, that's why you're seeing more and more developments, because it's not just the obvious that are developing. There's multiple new customers coming in, like a Stargate, that have a demand for a high capacity in a different region. And now all of a sudden, those are key customers in the data center world, whereas go back, however many years you want to go back, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, it was quite a small select bunch of customers. So we're seeing that dynamic now play out, I think.
Yeah. And I think how the market evolves in terms of the kinds of workloads that are being run as well is also going to have a massive impact on what the market looks like going forward as well. So up until this point, a lot of it's been dominated by training, right? Which is a massive cluster somewhere that has a massive amount of power, and latency, proximity to urban centers, and ultimately proximity to a user base isn't necessarily quite so important. But from an inference standpoint, and especially as we start seeing use cases coming to market, they're going to need to be that much closer to urban centers, because ultimately that's where the user base is going to be, right? And inference from a revenue curve standpoint versus training, it's potentially massive, depending on the model that you're taking. If you've got 1,000 customers who are all connecting via an API, the ROI metrics, depending on the model that you're serving, are absurd compared to just charging per GPU per hour, right? And for that, you want to get as close to the customers as potentially possible, which then means the little 1 megawatt here, 2 megawatts there, 500 kilowatts here, then becomes really, really, really interesting, because you can get basically in the basement, right? And there is a not insignificant portion of very large portfolios of commercial real estate at the moment that are in a bit of a hole, because rates have changed, because work dynamics have changed, people aren't coming back to the office, and all of a sudden people are losing money hand over fist, but they've got a building that has a massive amount of power being delivered to it that just isn't being used at the moment. Couple this with net zero, right? And you're looking for ways to reduce emissions. Well, if you've got effectively a heating plant in the basement in the form of a few racks here and there, and you're still paying to heat the building as well, that doesn't make sense, because you're producing 2 lots of heat for the same purpose potentially, right? So if there's ways that you can close that gap along with bringing the capacity closer to the customers, that's a very, very different market again. And then it's not a case of, right, I need 1.2 gig here or 500 megawatts there. It's, I want every single basement in this particular part of the city, and I'll figure everything out thereafter. Now, is the planning system set up to do that at the moment? Absolutely not. Right? And this isn't just in the UK, worldwide, it's a very different paradigm. But that's where it looks like the market could potentially be heading, because if you've got self-driving cars, if you've got robotics, if you've got other real-time AI applications, 30 milliseconds of latency is huge. And 30 milliseconds isn't very much, right? But if you've got real-time applications that are dependent on effectively data streaming between wherever the models are being run and wherever the models are interacting with the real world, every millisecond of latency is going to have an impact.
Yeah, and if I want my robot to do something, I want my robot to do it.
Don't want it to lag.
I don't want to have to wait for my robot to go and get me a cup of coffee.
Right?
I'm not paying for it. But no, it's true. Like, jokes aside, it's true. And I've talked to some investors around that as well, like looking at hotels, and there's hotels now being designed with data centers in the basement, basically. And like you say, the heat aspect of it, the energy aspect of it, the water aspect of it, there's loads of positives that can come out of that once it's a feasible way of developing, basically. But yeah, definitely need edge. It's not all about the massive 1 gig, 2 gig, 3 gig, 4 gig campuses that are now being announced. That edge, or whatever you want to call it, closer to source, is going to be even more important as we move into that technological revolution, which is happening. And I want a robot. I want a robot as quickly as I can.
Yeah,
I saw definitely. The ones that was it in China. I saw some robots the other day that were on. I saw them on X or somewhere. Robots that are literally like $20,000 lifelike robots now. But
no, it's cheaper than that. So this was the Unitary one they just announced.
It might be,
right? It was doing like cartwheels and stuff.
Yeah,
like
that was
right?
it.
6,000 US. So it's cheaper than a high end Mac.
And who doesn't want a robot that can do cartwheels?
Exactly. I mean, it can't do my washing. It can't do any of the jobs I don't want to do. But
it's basically one of my children. They can't do any of the jobs I want to do, but they're very good at cartwheels. maybe that's what they base it on. Another one of the large ones that I sort of Meta, I think, is quite a cool company to pay attention to. I find Meta quite fascinating. Facebook is a very simple product when you actually think about it, but they're making more and more from advertising now, which is as a result of AI. But then people always say, why are they investing all this capex in AI? What's the use case? And you're like, well, think about how they're making more and more profit now through AI, through their advertising. But they had that 1 gigawatt development, is it Prometheus, I think it's called, and also the Hyperion. I liked the way that Zuckerberg announced it by plonking it on Manhattan as an image, just to show the scale of it. And I still get messages from people now, because that post's still doing the rounds on LinkedIn, saying, are they really building that in Manhattan? And I just leave it. I think I can't comment on it, but the way they marketed that was pretty cool. It got loads of interest.
Absolutely. And I think also the naming of those sites is really, really, really good as well. So for anyone who's not familiar, both Prometheus and Hyperion were titans in the Greek pantheon. So they're the previous generation of gods prior to Zeus and that lot of gods.
The gods of the gods.
Gods of the gods, exactly right. So Prometheus stole fire from the gods to give knowledge to man, right? Which is then why he got tied to a rock and was damned for all eternity to have his liver eaten on a daily basis while he was still alive. So there's some very clear, tough kick. Very, very clear naming there, like stealing fire from the gods in the form of knowledge. That's okay. I like that. Hyperion, if memory serves, was Prometheus's father, and Hyperion was the light bringer as well. So you've got a 5 gigawatt cluster called the light bringer, and Prometheus, which is stealing fire from the gods. I've got moral issues with Meta as a company, but whoever came up with that naming convention in this particular context they deserve a raise, because it was good.
Yeah, they are fascinating to watch, aren't they? Meta, they're an interesting one. I always read their earnings calls and and some of the things they come out with. It is interesting from understanding where these people think the market's going, and that's kind of what I take from stuff. It's trying to listen to these people that are obviously hyper intelligent. They know what they're doing, but to see how their views differ on where the market's going, because they do differ, but they're playing with tens of billions of dollars to try and predict the future before someone else.
That and the paychecks for the
that's the other thing that's come out, isn't it?
It's the newly formed super intelligence unit. So I saw a recent video from Zuckerberg. The big picture play is an individualized super intelligence for every single person, right? Which will know you better than you know yourself. I'm sure there's probably some commentary that you could have there around creating a product which destroys human connection and then creating an alternative to fill the gap to solve the problem that you created. But that's a different conversation. But the fact that they're going around offering like $1 billion, $1.2 billion packages for someone for a 4-year period, right? Like the only numbers that we have a kind of comparison with are footballers at this stage, right? It's like it's a 4-year contract for X number of hundreds of millions of dollars. Yeah. But these are now going to like AI researchers, right? So it's insane. To be quite honest, I have no idea what to think of it. But I mean, fair play if you're an AI researcher and you get someone knock on your door saying, right, do you want $1 billion to come and work for me for 4 years? Like, that's a difficult thing to say no to, unless apparently you're someone who is working at Thinking Machines, who's the previous, what's the name? Previous CTO of OpenAI, span off, set up Thinking Machines. Apparently, Zuckerberg has offered basically competitive offers like 25% of the team or something like that, which are all in the hundreds of millions of dollars, and every single person has said no. Every single one has said no. So there's a bit of that going on as well. And I mean, fair play. But in fairness, they've just raised $2 billion at a $10 billion valuation for a seed with no product and no roadmap. So, hey, why not?
We could try that. Data center news and GPUs. Seed funding.
Seed round.
We're out. We're public. We're going public right now. contact either of us.
Yeah, we haven't got any ideas, but that's fine because we've already validated that that's an idea in and of itself.
Exactly. We can help you predict the future. But yeah, no, like I always just think of the recruitment fee when I see things like that. I think
imagine
someone's doing very well out of it, but it also does again paint a picture of where the skills are going, because again, skills are really important, and like the future skills, understanding what my children, what skills they'll need is really, really important. And I think the salaries always gives you a picture of that, because the reason why the money is so high is because there's so few of these people, because it's a new skill. It's like, they have, whoever these individuals are, managed to learn the skill ahead of the world, really ahead of the industry. Therefore now they're the only ones that can do it. And it
also speaks to the power of specialization as well, right? Like these individuals are so deep in their little niche that no one can do what they do. No one can do what they do, right? And the deeper you go into a niche, the less people you're competing with, right? Until ultimately it becomes a market of one.
Exactly.
And that parallel also works from a platform differentiation standpoint as well, right? I've been pretty vocal about how I think bare metal's a commodity market. And there are two ways that you can deal with that. You can either go down the stack and you can operate your data centers, so you've got a little bit more play in terms of your pricing, or you can go up the stack and start vertically differentiating, and go into a niche, right? Start serving a particular customer base, solve problems for that specific customer base in a way that no one else can do it. And then all of a sudden you're not necessarily competing in quite the same way. It's the same thing across the board. Go deep enough into a niche and then life becomes a hell of a lot easier.
Totally agree. I remember when data centers was a niche.
Yeah, right.
And
it's a big niche now.
the funny thing is, some people still say to me, that's quite niche. I think, well, do your research, do your own research, as they say. But yeah, it's not quite as niche as it once was. And I'm sure some people listening understand that as well. It's, again, the scale is mad. Other thing I want to talk about, Scotland. Finally, in the last quarter, we've actually seen announcements of developments going in for planning. Apertura with I think around 300 megawatts it was. So Scotland is actually rising to where it hopefully should be, which is a pretty key player in the industry based on everything in Scotland with regards to the power, but also talent. There's so many great people that work in the industry from Scotland. It's also got oil and gas talent, which again needs repurposing. So that's an interesting move from a UK perspective to see finally some developments actually going through. Whether they will happen, we'll have to wait and see. Whether the Scottish government will push them forward, we don't know. But it's good to see that it's now hitting the press at last.
Especially from a power infrastructure standpoint up there as well, right? I've seen that there's a few conversations going on around, I think it's from Octopus Energy, driving it around zonal electricity pricing. In that if you're consuming power close to where the power is being generated, you get a better rate, effectively. I mean, if something like that goes through, that's a great way to bolster economic development in places that have perhaps not seen the same benefit of the past 20, 25, 30 years or so, right? But then that very much revolves around the assumption that the UK government is going to be willing to relinquish some power from London. And I don't know. I don't know about that. It's a nice idea in principle.
Yeah, but with the UK, you see, again, it goes full circle all the time. Like, we want to move, as in data centers, we want to move away from London.
Yeah,
we'll start announcing them elsewhere. Then it's, no, actually, we want to go back towards the London region.
Slough.
And yeah, exactly. And it goes back and forth. So it's good to see these conversations happening. And as I say, and whether it's Scotland or the rest of the UK, actually announcing, that there's developments being put into planning. But like, the proof is in the pudding. Like when these happen, is there demand for them as well? Are the customers out there? Do they want these facilities? I know those conversations will be happening with the developers, but until we see that move, we have to just assume that it's could be or couldn't be.
That's honestly, that's the biggest issue I have with the recently announced Teesworks AI growth zone, in that it's a massive site, but one, BP are also supposed to be doing something from a hydrogen standpoint on the site, and I know that there are some clashes going on as to, well, we can't do both with this site, right? So which one do you want? Do you want net zero, with the hydrogen production, or do you want a data center? Because it seems like there's some incompatibility there. But then also, like, it's a really long way away from large amounts of people, right? Which ultimately are going to be the ones that are consuming. Like a site of that scale, the number of users you're going to have, if it isn't for training, if it's for something else, or if it's for another paradigm entirely, then it's a long way away. Like the latency, it's not huge, but is it enough? Is it slow enough that all of these real-time AI applications end up having an issue? And like, I get it, because it's a big site and there aren't very many of that scale, but it's a long way away from everybody. So is it potentially commercially viable in the same way as some of the other sites that are closer to urban centers are going to be? I don't know, to be quite honest. I would love to have been a fly on the wall to understand how that decision making was made, because like Culham makes sense, right? It's in the Arc corridor with Oxford, Cambridge. It's all in that area, and that makes sense. But like, that's a long way away.
But yeah, Culham, like you said, perfect sense. Power station. And again, and you're starting to see those ones move through. And I think a lot of developments around power stations or, similar industrial facilities is where you're going to see where the power's already there. It's obvious, but it's a big redevelopment project, but it's definitely the right move. Other thing I was thinking, what have I been up to in the last few months? Went to Cannes, went to Data Cloud, which again seems like ages ago. I don't know if you've been. Oh
yeah, I saw the picture of that. Looked like you've been working really hard there. Yeah, looks like a really, really difficult conference.
I did work really hard. I actually worked so hard I pretty much lost my voice. But yeah, it was manic, absolutely manic. I think, again, I always say it, events paint a great picture of where the industry sits. More and more people every year. They broke records as an event for attendees into the event. You've obviously also got thousands of people outside of the event. So again, another example and one of those moments when you think, wow, like this industry is booming right now. But it was a fun event. Have you been anywhere? I know you've been in the US, but been anywhere?
GTC Paris was the big one, the last big one, and that was really, really interesting for a couple of reasons. From an announcement standpoint, relative to GTC in March in San Jose, nothing massive, really. Nothing game changing, to use the overused AI terminology. But it became obvious just how dense the talent in Europe is, right? Like, because VivaTech that it was bolted onto is massive, absolutely massive conference. And then GTC was kind of bolted onto the side of that. And then seeing the density of talent, the density of companies that are actively exploring opportunities in Europe, and the scale of the opportunities that are now coming to light, right? Like with the Stargate project in Norway with Nscale that was announced today. Massive, right? So progress, I think, is the biggest thing there. And like, you've got this massive talent density, and now it's clear that like the market is validating the quality of that talent as well. But I think honestly, the more interesting thing there was the timing of GTC Paris, because on the same week, AMD's Advancing AI conference happened as well. And GTC Paris didn't exist like 6 or 7 weeks prior to it happening. And then I think it was the Tuesday of GTC Paris week, NVIDIA put out 18 press releases. And then Jensen then spent most of the day on the show floor taking photos with absolutely everybody. Which meant that by the time Thursday rolled around, which is when all of the AMD announcements started coming out, everyone's social media feed was just full of Jensen with taking pictures of people. Right?
He is a marketing genius. I say
he is. I 100% agree. But I think that the nature of AMD's announcements, especially with the rack scale systems. So there was the ZT Systems acquisition that went through relatively recently, and then that's ultimately going to feed through into the MI400, MI450 rack scale solutions and the Helios solutions, right? Which are big systems. We're talking like 2 kilowatt cards potentially, some of these, which is mad. But the benchmarking and the performance and ultimately ROCm, the software ecosystem that AMD have been slowly updating, and now it's starting to get to a much better level of usability. It's getting there, right? And you've got NVIDIA with 92% market dominance, AMD with 8% market dominance, Intel not shipping enough GPUs to even be seen as a rounding error in terms of the overall percentages. I mean, 92% is realistically only one way that's going to go. And I've probably said this before on a previous one, but I think with where AMD is at, that's what the most interesting thing is going to be. So with GTC Paris, my biggest takeaway was that owing to the PR strategy and the fact that there wasn't any massive announcements, maybe there's some internal discussions going on around, right, what does AMD mean for the market? And then also challenger silicon, like the alternative semiconductors as well, right? Saw the Furiosa AI, the South Korean semiconductor manufacturer who Meta tried to buy back in, I think it was April, for $800 million, and they said no to. They've just landed LG as a customer as well. And I think they've also just closed a funding round as well. So they're obviously doing something quite interesting. And they're 150 watt PCIe cards with better token throughput performance than NVIDIA's L40S. That's quite interesting. And if inference is ultimately power constrained in the same way that training is power constrained, but you're getting better performance from a token throughput standpoint with some of this stuff, that's very, very different as well. Now, that is not to say that NVIDIA are going to be struggling in any way, shape or form at the moment, because the market has spoken and the market continues to speak in a very, very loud manner. But I think over the course of the next probably year or so, we'll start seeing a little bit of a change. I mean, if they can maintain 92% market dominance, then fair play.
And the thing about the market is the size of the market, isn't it? I know it's obvious, but you know, the market is growing and growing and growing. So maintaining a high percentage.
$4 trillion company. NVIDIA's a $4 trillion company. Microsoft also, I think, crossed 4 trillion. I think it was last night. In after hours trading as well. So we've gone from no $4 trillion companies to two very involved in AI over the course of like a week, 2 weeks or so.
And you've still got people asking,
5 in the next 6 months.
And when you listen to the earnings calls or read the earnings calls, you've still got people saying about, well, how are we going to make money out of AI? We think, well, if they're not making money out of it now, it's only going one way, isn't it? Like if and obviously there is the question, will they? But you know, I think we're pretty confident there'll be multiple use cases that will be profitable. But
and it's not just chatbots as well.
No,
right?
that's what I mean.
I think
exactly,
that's the really, really big thing. And like things like GPT-5 potentially, which is supposed to be coming out in August, right? That's potentially going to be another step change. And yes, there are problems with the LLM paradigm, and then there are some unsolved technical issues around things like prompt injection and that sort of thing, which mean that from a security standpoint, it's not great. But it's not just text that this stuff works for, right? So have you heard of a company called Basecamp Research?
No.
So Basecamp Research have basically been out in the jungle, literally, just out there collecting biological data. They have the biggest, deepest, most comprehensive data set of basically the largest chunk of the entire tree of life of anyone out there at the moment. And this is like baseline genomic data. They're now starting to look at ways to monetize that data as well. And if you start throwing that kind of data into model training and that sort of thing, that's absolutely massive. Right? Like from a healthcare, from a medicine, from a just general understanding of the world around us perspective, that's absolutely huge. And like it's stuff like that that's just starting to come into the media ecosystem, for lack of a better phrase. It's been going on for years, right? It's just people haven't been talking about it because everyone's thinking, oh, like this chatbot's amazing, right? And chatbots are interesting, yeah, but it's not necessarily the most exciting. There's other really exciting stuff going on in the background. And I think that's the kind of stuff which we're now starting to see come to light. And also, like, AI today is the worst it's ever going to be.
I know, and I always think
it just gets better.
I always say that, and I still think most people don't even know what AI means. They just say it.
I mean, in fairness, it is a marketing term, right? Goes way back. I've read, was it Karen Howe? She wrote the Empire of AI, I think it was, their kind of expose. Interesting book, and artificial intelligence was basically a rebrand of something like autonomous studies, or something like, it was some generic thing that the public didn't understand. They rebranded it to AI, and lo and behold, everyone starts talking about it, right? Like, same with AGI as well. It's what does that mean? Or artificial superintelligence, and you've got competing definitions for these things, which ultimately are PR for a given company, which is pushing their vision of what they think is going to be. And I think it's really difficult to understand, what does it actually mean, right? Because the lines start getting blurred. But whatever it is getting better. And it's getting better quickly.
Exactly. It's amazing. It's ridiculous what it can do already. And like you say, it's only the start of a very, very long journey, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Anything else before we cut this off? Anything else over the last 3 months that should be a month that's taken a hit you in the news?
I think data center adjacent. I think one other thing that's interesting at the moment is what's going on in the power space. In terms
there is not enough.
There's not enough for one, but then also the speed of development of new technologies in that space as well, right? So you've got, I think it was an AIDC grid in Korea, which was commissioned or announced as a project recently that's looking into superconducting grids, right? So superconductors for a grid for AI data centers. And that means, lower OPEX, lower CapEx, higher efficiency. That's huge, right? Especially if you're someone who's looking at grid upgrades at the moment, that's going to be absolutely massive. Also, Helion, they're a fusion reactor manufacturer. Was it Microsoft they signed a deal with recently?
Yeah.
They've just started building the first commercial fusion power plant on the planet. And that's huge. And the fact that Microsoft have come in as a customer, or whoever the hyperscaler was, it's pretty validating in terms of what they're building and how they're building it. Seems to be interesting because, fusion's one of those technologies that everyone jokes is always like 20 years away, right? Apparently not. It's 2027. That's when it's hitting. So all of this development that's happening as well, and then obviously the resurgence in nuclear, and then all of this stuff as well, it's all in support of ultimately AI, right? And this massive infrastructure build out.
Yeah,
where that goes.
Yeah, AI's caused the governments to move. The problem was there, wasn't it? We've experienced it just from paying our bills, and I'm sure that's no different to most people. There's a huge demand for it. Populations are increasing, but AI has made them actually have to do something because they now see that they're going to miss out economically significantly if they're not able to move fast enough. There's a few, I know a few off-grid developments that will be announced fairly soon for data centers that are in Europe. So yeah, it's definitely moving in the right direction. There's some pretty cool stuff happening out there, but like you say, it's they have no choice. If you want to build at this scale, you need to find a power solution because it's not as easy as just finding the power. If it was that easy, we'd all be doing it. Yeah, right. Predictions for next time for you? What do you reckon? Yeah, I was thinking about this earlier when I was listening back to the predictions from last time. I don't really see anything specific. I think we'll just continue to see what we're seeing right now, which is major campus development announcements across the globe, and they will, similar to the Stargate Norway one that we've mentioned, similar to some of the ones in the US that are now in new regions, that scale of development, let's say 1 gigawatt plus in the US, 300 meg plus in Europe, I think you'll find a lot of these are going to be announced in newer regions, Scandinavia, Iberia. Obviously in the US, it's pretty much anywhere where there's not already a big amount of data centers, which is Virginia largely, but Texas continues to see the significant growth. But I think again we're going to see a move away from Texas soon because it's becoming a bit saturated with announcements. But yeah, I don't see anything changing a lot. I think when we talked about it in April, it was pretty clear market sentiment where it was. A lot of what I'm talking about now or hearing in the conversations is just more of the same. I think the CapEx is filtering through for next year already, that it's going to be similar. You started to see the hyperscalers move on the projects because a few have been delayed this year. So that will start to move. But other than that, I shouldn't say it, but I don't see any massive curveballs coming imminently. So expect a curveball next week.
You're right. Yeah.
About you, anything?
I tend to agree. I think the thing will be, as I said earlier, I think we'll start seeing some policy and ideological alignment starting to happen as to which other countries are buying into which vision for the future. I think that's what is probably going to be the next thing, because the AI Act is now in force, but enforcement starts on the 2nd of August. I think it is. It's Article 51, I think it is. Enforcement starts on the 2nd of August. Google have just announced that they've signed the voluntary code of conduct. Meta, on the other hand, have just outright refused and said, no, we're not doing it. I think we'll start to see an impact with enforcement. I think that might change dynamics a little bit, because I remember 6 months ago having conversations with various neocloud providers or anyone on the enterprise at a certain point. It was, on the one hand, we don't need to worry about certifications because it's expensive. It's not necessary at the moment. And then the enterprise being like, we can't engage because there are no certifications, right? Those two things seem to be coming together. I've seen that a lot of the bigger neoclouds have come up with SOC 1, SOC 2, ISO 27001, FedRAMP. All of these certifications have started to happen relatively recently and all at the same time. So I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing some bigger enterprise adoption outside of the standard. If we start seeing some trickle down, bigger announcements into maybe the larger SME space outside of the FTSE, for example, or the Fortune 100, 500. I think we'll start seeing some wider adoption in that regard. And then also alternative semiconductors, more market share.
They need a lot of them.
Yeah.
So,
in a word, yeah.
We need them. So, it's going to, like, agreed. That's when innovation happens out of necessity, isn't it? So It's going to come. It's definitely coming. And I think the other thing I was going to say is, I put a post the other day about doing a pubcast, Inside Data Center pubcast.
Great name.
I've decided that podcasts are much more fun with a beer in a pub. So we're looking at doing that end of August. I'll get a date, hoping we can get Ben along for a chat as well, but come back on that one. And obviously then it's event season again, September, bang, back at you, DCD London, on platform on Teams, capacity data cloud in the USA, DCAC in the USA. We could go on and on and on. So I'm sure we'll be out on the road somewhere and we'll catch up with some of the listeners, but hopefully we can we'll do the pubcast, and then hopefully we can get another episode in, probably, I'm not even going to say a month anymore, because it's
in the future.
End of September, I reckon end of September, so in a couple of months. But I know a lot will happen in that time period, so we'll have a lot to chat about. But if you want to reach out to us, you listeners, you know where we are. Come and find us. Always happy to chat, happy to help if we can. If you've got any news, fire it our way. We'll get it in the newsletters. Keep the GPU and weekly data center news. They're always out every week, without fail, pretty much.
Yep.
Unless
nearly at 2,000 subscribers now. It's not far off. Nearly there.
It, yeah. Keep growing. But yeah, definitely go and have a look if you're interested in the GPU side. Check out Ben's newsletter. Well worth the subscription. Cool. I'll leave you to it for the day. It's Thursday today, 31st July. We'll get this out early August, so it'll be out next week. So hopefully not a lot's happened between now and then. But if it does, we apologise we missed it. We'll get it in the next one.
Beautiful. Thanks, Andy. Thanks for having me. It's been a good conversation. And again, there's never a dull moment, is there? I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about the next one.
Exactly. Always something happening. Have a good day.
You too.
All good.